I never liked the Lancaster family gatherings, but this year I had to show up. In a simple navy blue dress, I stood near the bar in the grand hall of Uncle Harold's mansion, quietly observing the booming laughter, the mutual flattery, and the self-satisfied glances, like everyone was competing for the lead role in an elite drama. The towering crystal chandeliers reflected off the mirrored walls, creating a dazzling, almost suffocating space. The scent of expensive perfume mixed with the gleam of polished walnut floors made me feel like I was standing in a museum of so-called status. They, the ones with Lancaster blood, always knew how to turn every gathering into a power display. I had just lifted my champagne glass to my lips when Aunt Margaret's voice cut through the classical music, sharp as scissors. "Victoria! Goodness! I almost didn't recognise you, still working as a secretary at... what was it again? Apex Consulting." I smiled, keeping my gaze calm while my heart beat steadily. "Executive assistant, Auntie. And yes, still at Apex." She raised an eyebrow, a familiar move whenever she was about to pass judgment. "Well, haven't moved to a real company yet. You should consider it. You know, you could be doing so much more if you used your time wisely." I didn't respond, not because I didn't want to, but because I was far too used to comments like that. In their eyes, women in this family either married powerful men or worked in support roles, always supporting men, you know. Another voice chimed in smugly. It was Alex, my cousin, recently appointed deputy executive director at his father's firm just 2 months ago. "If you ever want a real job, I can talk to Dad. Our legal department is looking for someone to draft contracts." I hid a smile by taking another sip. If Alex knew I had just approved a $38 million restructuring contract last week, he probably wouldn't have said that. "Thanks, but I'm happy with my current job," Alex scoffed. "Well, good. Just remember, stability doesn't mean success." That line was no doubt memorized from some leadership seminar for newly promoted execs. I said nothing. I just recalled a recent email from my company's communications department reminding me to prep for an interview with Forbes Business Weekly. My eyes wandered around the room, where my relatives proudly discussed construction contracts, financial projects, investment strategies. Most were men, all in navy suits and expensive watches. The few women present were mostly wives or girlfriends, dressed to impress, but no one mentioned their careers. The Lancasters never hid their favouritism toward men. It was practically embedded in their bloodline. Women in this family were only praised when they were in the background, a wife with social grace, a daughter with a clean image, a dependable secretary. Nothing more. I once tried to prove I could be more. But the year I graduated with an MBA from Wharton with honours, all I got from them was a bouquet. No card, no celebratory dinner. When I pitched a proposal to transform small businesses through agile consulting models at a family gathering, 7 years ago, they laughed. "Consulting," Uncle Harold had said, loud enough for the maid carrying drinks to pause. "Victoria, let the big firms handle that stuff. You should be thinking about settling down." That night, I left Uncle Harold's mansion with one goal. I would build my own empire, quietly, and one day they would have to listen. I chose the name Apex Solutions because it evoked the summit, the place I was headed. It started with just me and an old laptop, working from a rented office above a shoe repair shop in Milwaukee. But I had something they didn't. A clear vision, a sharp strategy, and a restructuring approach major firms hadn't dared to try. 7 years later, Apex has become a known name in corporate restructuring. But to the Lancasters, I'm still just Secretary Victoria. I looked at the glass in my hand, the light catching the thick rim, like all the times I'd been underestimated. I finished my drink, set the glass down, and smiled. They never knew that. The secretary they looked down on had blocked more than a few massive acquisition deals they thought were already theirs. And tonight, as they eagerly shared stories about new contracts, I waited for just one moment. The moment someone casually mentioned the name Apex. When that happened, I wouldn't need to say a word. All I'd do was smile and let the truth slowly unfold. I still remember that winter night clearly, the night every bit of belief I had in family finally crumbled. I was only 26 then, just under a year out of my MBA program. Fueled by the passion of youth, I believed that if I presented my ideas clearly enough, I could convince them, the heads of the Lancaster clan, that my proposal wasn't just feasible. It had the potential to reshape the future of small business consulting. I had prepared meticulously: presentation slides, market reports, business models, a 3-year strategy, everything neatly stored on the black USB drive I'd kept since college. I stood in Uncle Harold's meeting room, where the polished mahogany reflected the warm yellow lights, and began my pitch. For the first 10 minutes, they maintained polite expressions. 10 minutes later, a faint chuckle escaped from Uncle Raymond, who managed the family's real estate investment chain. By the 30th minute, Uncle Harold couldn't hold back anymore. "Victoria, you're a smart girl, but you've got your head in the clouds. Small business restructuring consulting. Who's going to believe in you? What experience do you have? You've never run a company." "That's why I'm starting with small businesses. I have a plan to grow steadily, forming strategic partnerships with—" "Enough." His voice was cold. "If you really want to work, come to my office next week. I'll get you a spot in the records room. Start with the basics." The room fell silent, except for the soft laugh from my cousin Marcus, who had filed for bankruptcy 3 times in 4 years, but was still seen as promising. That night, I left the mansion with one decision. I would do it on my own, without a single one of them. I started with the small amount I'd saved from years of part-time work and postgraduate scholarships. A tiny room on the 3rd floor of an old building in Edgewater, Chicago, right above a phone repair shop, became the first headquarters of Orion Strategies, the name I chose instead of Apex because I wanted it to evoke long-term vision and clarity, like constellations in the sky. At first, there was no sign, no receptionist, no polished office, just me, an old desk, and an unshakable belief that I was doing the right thing. I handwrote every business plan for my first client, a print shop drowning in debt and operating costs. They came to me because they had no other options. I spent nearly 2 months living in their balance sheets, accompanying them to every bank meeting, renegotiating every supply contract. When their revenue rose 19% in a single quarter, the name Orion Strategies began to circulate in local business circles, like a rumour no one could confirm. I knew if I wanted to go further, I had to stay hidden. I hired an old friend, a corporate law expert, to act as my legal representative. I signed all documents as an independent advisor. I declined every interview. When clients came in, I was the project assistant. When they left, I was the one coordinating every strategy. Every employee I hired, from analysts to accountants, signed a confidentiality agreement. They didn't know I was the founder. They only knew me as Victoria, the one who keeps everything running smoothly. 3 years later, Orion had 4 small branches in Chicago, Minneapolis, Austin, and Denver. Though no one knew my name, I had successfully negotiated contracts with 3 retail chains and a tech company on the brink of collapse. I kept myself out of every photo, every press conference, every industry event. Not because I feared being exposed, but because I wanted to steer every step myself. No spotlight distracted me, no handshake threw me off course. I vividly remember, one night, walking past the office after a late meeting. The glass door still glowed faintly with the blue light from the projector. A few documents lay scattered on the conference table. I paused to look through the glass and saw my reflection, not the woman in a plain dress, silent at a Lancaster family gathering, but someone slowly gaining real power, the power of knowledge, perseverance, and strategy. No one in my family knew. To them, I was still Victoria, the unmarried niece working as an assistant at some company they'd never heard of. But I was quietly building an empire, solid, steady, and increasingly impossible to overlook. And I knew the time for them to see who I really was would come. 6 years after I opened that first tiny office, Orion Strategies had become a name that couldn't be dismissed in the corporate restructuring field. But the point wasn't the reputation, it was the way we operated. Quietly, strategically, and most importantly, anonymously. When the stock market started to fluctuate, when family businesses began to crumble from supply chain disruptions, and when major corporations smelled opportunity for acquisitions, that was when Orion became the name many business owners called as a last chance. We didn't launch loud campaigns, no PR blitz, no CEO talk shows, no magazine cover interviews. Everything started through discreet referrals among executives. There's a group of experts who never go public, but if they take your case, your company might survive. That discretion helped us stay off the radar of speculators, especially those at Lancaster Holdings. I discovered a truth that was both bitter and, in a way, fitting. The very company run by Uncle Raymond, the one who once scoffed at my business proposal, was leading the charge in acquiring struggling family-owned businesses. They didn't restructure. They split, sold cheap, and erased the trail. And so I began to shift my focus. I hired a market research team specialised in tracking cold acquisitions across the US, sudden approaches, lowball buyout offers, contracts that left no trace in the press. Among the names that surfaced, several companies were on the verge of being swallowed by Lancaster Holdings. I didn't tell anyone, no need. I simply began reaching out to those businesses before my family could make their move: a shipyard in Portland, an electronic components manufacturer in Ohio, an organic cosmetics brand in New Mexico. They were all small businesses, full of potential but lacking strategy and capital, and they were all ready to sell, thinking there was no way out. But when they received an email from an unfamiliar address with a message saying, "Let us review your books before you sign any deal," at least half of them agreed to a meeting. And after that meeting, most of them chose Orion. We didn't just save them from collapse. We gave them a 90-day action plan, restructuring operations, renegotiating supplier contracts, reorganizing cash flow, and most importantly, building a sustainable roadmap for at least the next 2 years. All executed by top-tier experts, carefully, selected, and following the exact strategy I had laid out. With every successful case, Orion not only earned a generous consulting fee, but also quietly shut down a takeover plan from none other than my own family. The one I remember most was the deal in Seattle. A medical equipment manufacturer called Caldwell Instruments was under pressure from Lancaster Holdings. I flew out there and personally attended the meeting, still under the title of Strategic Assistant. I quietly took notes, observed, and organised documents in front of the CEO. No one knew that every major decision was being made by me, step by step, through gentle suggestions from senior advisors I had trained. When I walked out of that meeting room, the Seattle sky had opened up with rain. I stood under the awning, looking toward the high-rises glowing with city lights. I knew that somewhere in a fancy office in Manhattan, Uncle Raymond was fuming after realizing his prize deal had just been stolen by an invisible rival. But they still didn't know it was me. To the staff, I was still just Victoria from Internal Analysis. I never signed my real name on any documents. Every email I sent came from a shared account. Even the original founders had no idea who was leading the company. I didn't need the spotlight. All I needed was to know that with each step, each small business we saved, I was reclaiming what they had once refused to give me. 10 years passed, and Orion Strategies had opened offices in 11 cities, managing a restructuring portfolio of over 80 businesses. But no one, not even my own family, could link my name to the empire they had grown to fear but couldn't touch. I used to think secrecy was a form of protection. Now I understand it was strategy, a perfect strategy. And when my family realised there was an unseen force blocking their every move, it might already be too late to turn back. The call came at 8 p.m. on Wednesday. I was reviewing the Southern Region expansion plan when Maya, my direct assistant, walked in holding the internal phone. Her eyes lit with something she had just discovered. "Victoria, Cresman Industries just sent an urgent message. Looks like Lancaster Holdings is trying to pressure them into accepting a merger deal within 72 hours, and as far as I know, they reached out to Orion 2 weeks ago." I looked up and gave a small nod. I had expected this. Cresman was one of the few remaining family-owned businesses in Missouri, specializing in advanced agricultural equipment. They were in the middle of a financial restructuring, and as usual, Lancaster Holdings had sensed weakness. Uncle Raymond and his strategic investment team were preparing to make their final move. I stood and walked over to the large glass board, in my office, where our targeted deals were being closely tracked. In the upper left corner, the name Cresman was marked in orange. I reached for a marker and circled it. Tell them I'll attend the meeting personally, have them schedule it for Saturday morning at the Chicago headquarters. Maya hesitated. You're going to reveal yourself. I nodded. It's time. Saturday morning. I stepped into the large conference room on the 21st floor of the Orion Strategies building, the headquarters that the Lancaster family still believed belonged to a mid-tier consulting firm not worth their attention. They had walked past this place many times during investment summits, even once sat in this very room without realizing I had been there too, playing the role of logistics coordinator. Today was different. I chose a slate grey suit, sharply tailored, paired with a high-collared white shirt. Nothing flashy, but just enough to establish presence. Maya had already prepared the files, documents, and a detailed breakdown of the merger terms. All I had to do was walk in and deliver. The final move. At 8:45 a.m., the delegation from Lancaster Holdings arrived. Leading the group was Uncle Raymond, wearing his usual confident demeanour, one hand in his suit pocket, a deep red tie standing out against a charcoal grey suit. Beside him were Alex, my cousin, now serving as a senior legal advisor, and Claire, another cousin who had once refused to partner with me when I proposed investing in her logistics startup 3 years ago. They didn't recognise me right away. To them, I was still the slightly stubborn niece of the Lancaster family, working somewhere they couldn't be bothered to remember. That changed the moment I pulled out the chair at the centre of the conference table, the seat reserved for Orion Strategies' highest-ranking representative. The room shifted. Good morning. I'm Victoria Lancaster, founder and CEO of Orion Strategies, I said evenly. And I'll be leading today's meeting. Claire dropped her pen. Alex stared at me as if he was seeing a completely different person. Uncle Raymond, stunned for a split second, squinted at me. What is this? You're the CEO of Orion? That's impossible. Maybe because you've never really looked at me, just like you've never really looked at any of the women in this family, unless they were pouring drinks or entertaining guests. Maya stepped in quietly, placing folders on the table, distributing them to each person. I looked each of them in the eye, slowly, deliberately. The documents in front of you outline Orion's proposed merger terms for Cresman Industries, if you wish to continue negotiations. If not, starting Monday, we'll proceed with acquiring 35% of Cresman's shares, which are currently being privately offered, backed by an international investment fund. The deal will close in 10 days. Alex cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. This isn't legitimate. You can't just show up and change the rules like this. I'm not changing the rules, I cut in. I'm just the only one here who knows the whole board. Uncle Raymond looked at me with a complicated expression. You've hidden this from us for 10 years. You're betraying your family. I let out a laugh, but there wasn't a hint of humour in it. Betrayal? What family exactly? The one that laughed at me during a meeting when I talked about starting my own business? Or the one that only mentions my name as an example of a girl who hasn't made it? I stood up, my hand resting lightly on the folder in front of me. I used your dismissal as a shield, and with it I built a company that doesn't just survive, it's redefining how businesses are saved. Not to be sold off, but to be revived. I paused, my gaze locked on Uncle Raymond. Cresman is your last chance to collaborate with respect. If the family chooses to continue its path of acquisition, then I'll see you on the stock exchange. And with a slight nod, I stepped out of the meeting room, leaving behind stunned faces, an echo of silence, and the quiet shift of a storm changing direction. I didn't go back in right away. Instead, I stood by the glass hallway on the 21st floor, looking down at the bustling street below. The March wind cut through my thick coat, but I didn't feel cold. I felt clearer than ever. The look in Uncle Raymond's eyes earlier. Confusion, yes, but also a hint of fear. Maya stepped beside me, holding a tablet. Claire's reviewing the contract again, Alex is on the phone with legal, and Uncle Raymond, he's wondering how the niece he once called invisible just managed to put the entire family on the defensive. I smiled faintly, still watching the city. I decided to return. This game wasn't over yet. When I pushed open the door, the mood had shifted. Claire was no longer sitting upright. Alex had loosened his tie and was flipping through the documents tensely. Uncle Raymond sat with arms crossed, stone-faced, but his eyes were darting, searching for an exit. I pulled out my chair and sat down slowly, deliberately. "I assume you're trying to find a way to regain control," I said calmly, as if beginning a routine internal meeting. "Allow me to save you some time." I snapped my fingers. Maya handed me another folder. I pulled out 3 documents and placed one in front of each person. These are records of the deals Lancaster Holdings pursued over the past 3 years, but that ultimately fell through with no clear reason. Alex frowned, studying me. Claire began flipping through the papers. Uncle Raymond didn't move. It seemed he already knew what was coming. I listed them one by one. Plymouth Textiles. Deal fell apart at the last minute after a consulting firm proposed a full restructuring plan that increased the company's valuation by 23%. Noblecraft, a furniture company in Texas, advised to shift their distribution model, and within 6 months, their stock value nearly doubled, far surpassing the original acquisition offer. Anderson Robotics, a startup in Denver, ready to sell for $14 million, but after one anonymous strategic consulting session, they secured a $60 million manufacturing contract. I paused, curling a slight smile. They all have one thing in common. Each was approached, analysed and restructured by Orion Strategies, which means by me. Alex dropped his pen. Claire closed her eyes for a brief second. Uncle Raymond kept staring at me. "You sabotaged a series of our deals," he said slowly. "No," I corrected him. "I saved the companies you were trying to erase," Claire whispered, barely audible. "You've been there this whole time. In the shadows." I nodded. "Exactly. And the most interesting part is none of you ever noticed. Why? Because I don't dress like an executive? Because I don't show up in magazines? Or because you never believed a young woman in this family could be someone who matters?" Uncle Raymond gripped the armrest of his chair tightly. "If you think you can force us to accept these terms—" "No," I interrupted, locking eyes with him. "I'm not forcing you. I'm offering a choice." I slid the merger agreement closer. "You can sign here, preserve your dignity and a portion of the financial gain or refuse, and I'll proceed to acquire the remaining shares freely on the open market. At that point, Orion will hold full control over Cresman. No more negotiation." No one said a word for several seconds. Then Claire spoke softly. "If we decline, they'll do exactly what she said. I've reviewed their cash flow. They have the resources to acquire controlling shares in less than 2 weeks." Alex exhaled, picking up his pen. "I think we should accept." "Uncle..." Raymond suddenly stood up. "I need a minute." He left the room, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the water glasses. Maya leaned toward me and whispered, "Do you want to pause the meeting?" I shook my head. No, they need time to realise the world has changed, and I'm not little Victoria anymore. 15 minutes later, Uncle Raymond returned, his face no longer cold and sharp. There was something different in his eyes, something more tired. He didn't say a word, just pulled out his chair, sat down, picked up the pen, and signed. I didn't say anything more, just nodded respectfully, stood up, picked up the folder, and walked out of the room. Outside, the sun had broken, through after the night's rain. Light poured through the tall glass windows, reflecting off the polished stone floor. I had played my move perfectly, and for the first time, the Lancaster family was the one to retreat. 3 weeks after the signing at Orion headquarters, Monday's Tom financial news lit up with headlines. Cresman Industries officially merged with Orion Strategies under a sustainable growth partnership model. The market responded quickly. Orion stock rose 17% in 48 hours. Lancaster Holdings. It plummeted. I sat in my office, watching the news ticker on the big screen. In the lower corner, my name appeared for the first time on national TV. Victoria. Lancaster, the mysterious CEO behind this year's biggest business turnarounds. I turned off the TV. Success was never the destination. For me, this was only the beginning of a much bigger transformation. The special shareholders meeting of Lancaster Holdings was scheduled the following week. For the first time in the company's history, a woman, me, was nominated for a seat on the board of directors. Not because they wanted to, but because Orion's stake had surpassed 31%. I walked into the meeting wearing an ivory suit, the boardroom, lights catching the glass wall behind me, forming a soft halo, as if the entire room had converged its gaze on one centre. And it had. The faces of the ageing board members, mostly men, showed unease they couldn't hide. A few forced polite smiles. Others avoided eye contact. But one person didn't show up. Alex, the cousin who once smugly claimed he could get me a real job, had just been asked to step down temporarily from his legal advisor role due to conflicts of interest uncovered in multiple deals. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt right. When invited to speak, I stepped up to the podium, placed my hand on the table and looked straight into the camera, live streaming to thousands of shareholders. We will no longer operate by outdated thinking. Buy low, sell high, strip down, and walk away. Starting today, Lancaster Holdings will become a platform for investment, renewal and restoration. We won't just acquire companies, we will help them stand on their own, and I'm here to make sure of that. I stepped down to a smattering of applause that gradually swelled into a full round, slightly awkward but undeniable. The balance of power was shifting. Claire, my cousin who once deeply doubted me, sent an apology email. It wasn't long, just, "You were right, and you did what no one thought possible. I hope one day I can learn from you." I read it, saved it, to my to remember folder, and didn't respond. Uncle Raymond, on the other hand, remained completely silent. I knew it wouldn't be easy for him to accept defeat, especially when it came at the hands of someone he once saw as a shadow on the sidelines. But the last time we ran into each other at an industry event, he simply nodded at me. No criticism, no condescension, just a nod. Perhaps that was the biggest acknowledgement he could give me. As for Patricia, the ever-composed aunt, she began a campaign to rebuild her image. She appeared on a podcast for accomplished women, her voice sweet. I always believed Victoria had potential. Our family is very proud of her. Unfortunately, the internet doesn't forgive easily. Within an hour of the podcast airing, an old video from the previous year resurfaced. A family birthday party where Patricia plainly told me in front of everyone, "Victoria, stop dreaming. You don't have the Lancaster business gene. That's for the men." The clip went viral. The hashtag #ThisIsTheRealPatricia trended overnight. Aunt Patricia had to pause all media appearances, delete her personal social media accounts, and avoid the press. 2 months later, James, the youngest cousin, asked to meet me at a cafe in Lincoln Park. He brought a pitch for a joint venture, an investment arm under Orion focused on female-founded startups. It sounded noble, but I saw the ambition in his eyes. James never did anything that didn't benefit himself. I sipped my coffee, looked him in the eye. "James, Orion wasn't built to monopolise. We built it to share value, but only with those who truly believe in that. You're not ready." I stood, left the cheque along with my short refusal and walked out. Behind me, James sat in silence, his usual confidence gone for the first time. I didn't need to defeat them. They lost their footing all on their own, through arrogance and bias. Justice doesn't always arrive with a gavel. Sometimes it comes when the people who once dismissed you are forced to listen, and in my case, to learn silence. 3 months after that historic shareholder meeting, my life entered. A completely new phase. No more hiding behind anonymity, no more pretending to be an admin or silent observer in boardrooms. I, Victoria Lancaster, was now not only recognised as the force behind Orion's strategies, but also a symbol for the women once overlooked, once dismissed for not fitting the mould, interview requests, partnership offers, panel invitations. They came flooding in like a wave. But I didn't accept them all. I chose carefully, because I knew I didn't need to be a public figure. I needed to be real, a voice for dreams that had once been silenced, then quietly reignited. The Business Innovation Awards ceremony in Washington, D.C. was one of the few events I agreed to attend. It was an early summer evening, the sky cloudless, the lights from the Grand Hall sparkling against glass like a dream made real. I stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause, plaque in hand for Strategic Business Innovator of the Year 2025. Before hundreds of watching faces, I took a deep breath and spoke. Exactly 10 years ago, I was laughed at by the very people I called family when I spoke about starting a consulting firm. They said I was dreaming, said I should start in the archives, said I should think about marriage, not business, and I did follow their advice, but in my own way. I paused as light laughter echoed from the crowd. I built from a small office above a phone repair shop. I quietly observed, learned, and step by step created what you now call success. But to me, success isn't in numbers or awards. It's when a college senior messages me. I didn't think I could until I found out you did. It's when a former admin walks into a boardroom as a leader. The room went silent. Then the applause erupted, long and unrelenting. After the event, I was invited to speak at over a dozen universities and women-led startup organisations. I shared my story, not to brag, but to be honest. I spoke about the moments I wanted to give up, the nights alone, surrounded by reports, the times I turned down opportunities because I wasn't ready to step into the light. And in return, I saw their eyes light up. Something I once thought I'd never get to pass on. A month later, I received a pale brown envelope. No return address, just a handwritten line. Victoria, for your eyes only. Inside was Uncle Raymond's resignation letter. It was brief, just 1 page, but every sentence made me pause. Victoria, I once believed I knew everything. I believed business was about power, speed, and control, but you've shown me another way, smarter, more human. I'm stepping down from the Lancaster Holdings Board. It's time for people like you to lead the next generation. I misjudged you, and I'm sorry. I folded the letter and sat quietly in my office, hand wrapped around my coffee mug, not from overwhelming emotion, but because I knew real change had begun. Not just in me, but within the very system that once boxed me in. I didn't keep the letter as a trophy. I tucked it into the first page of Orion's New Generation Strategy Journal as a reminder. Sometimes justice doesn't come through thunderous judgment, but in a humble handwritten note arriving right on time from the person you thought would never change. A few weeks later, I hosted the first meeting of the Next Foundation, a venture fund supporting women-led businesses across the Midwest. Sitting beside me were former assistants, teachers, nurses, single mothers, women who once never imagined leading. Now they were pioneers. I looked at them, then back at my own journey. And I knew, my true legacy isn't the company I built. It's the freedom I leave for those who come next, the freedom to dream, to begin again, and to believe no one has the right to say they can't. I was once the most underestimated woman in my own family, deemed not enough simply because I chose a different path. But that very dismissal became the fuel for quietly building an empire from nothing. Now I have nothing left to prove. I share this story only to remind you, sometimes power doesn't come from being given a chance, but from creating one, even when no one believes you can. What do you think about Victoria's journey, and how she overcame her family's judgment? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful real-life stories about family and resilience.